Good afternoon. This is Courtney King. I'm the Manager of Communications for CECP, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon, Preparing a Winning Excellence Awards Application. The goal of today's webinar is to support your organization in communicating the story of its philanthropic program and put your best foot forward to the jurors. First, I want you to notice a navigation bar on the right-hand portion of your screen. This toolbar allows you to communicate to us during the webinar. Since we view this as your webinar, tailored to your questions, I want to draw your attention to the bottom section of the toolbar that is titled Questions. You can type questions in this area, and we will be reviewing and addressing them throughout the session. In order to ensure that you can hear me, I'm going to start with a very brief test of our technology here. Some of you may have already used GoToWebinar, but want to make sure that we're all able to communicate with one another today. Please click on the Raise Your Hand icon, which is a little orange hand in the middle of the toolbar next to your name, if you can hear me clearly. Okay, great. I'm seeing a couple hands going up here, so I think that it sounds like everyone can hear me clearly. My colleague Allison will be typing instructions for people who might be having any difficulty hearing, and in that case, I'd encourage you to dial back into the call to make sure that you can hear clearly. I also want to mention that this navigation bar can be minimized by clicking on the orange arrow in the upper left hand of the section of the toolbar. You can also undock the questions area if you would just like to keep open the questions, and that icon looks like two lines with an arrow pointing to the left in your questions bar if you'd like to undock the questions to be able to see that entire area and then minimize the rest of the screen so that you can see the PowerPoint presentation without any of it being obstructed. We're going to start with a poll question to get started here. So the poll question is, have you already downloaded and reviewed the application? And the options are, I have downloaded and reviewed the application. I have downloaded but not reviewed the application. I have not downloaded the application, or the last choice is I am not planning to apply. So please select the option that most accurately represents your situation today, whether or not you've downloaded the application and whether or not you are familiar with the contents of the application. This is going to be helpful for me and for Margaret Coady, the Director of CECP, who will be joining me in just a minute, to really know how to tailor our presentation today towards your level of familiarity with the application. Those of you who've applied in the past may notice that there's some changes, so this will be extremely helpful to us. Okay. Any last people who'd like to vote, please get your votes in. We're going to close the voting in just a second. Okay, so it looks like 74% have not yet reviewed the application. 21% have downloaded but not reviewed, and then there's a small percentage who have. So terrific. Well, we'll be able to provide any information to you about the application today, so this is perfect. In today's conversation, just progressing to the next slide. In today's conversation, we plan to provide you with a brief history of CECP's Excellence Awards and the benefits of applying to both companies and nonprofit organizations. Then Margaret Coady, Director of CECP, will discuss the categories of Excellence Awards and explain the selection process and the independent selection committee that we have reviewing all of our applications this year. We will also discuss a suggested timeline for applying and tips for submitting a successful application, explaining how the standards of excellence in corporate giving are judged in the application. We've allotted a full hour for this session, but if we don't end up needing that amount of time, we can end before 4 p.m. Again, our goal is to help you tell your best possible stories, and we're here to answer your questions. So start jotting down your questions or type them into the questions box as you think of them. CCP has provided resources for you on our website, corporatephilanthropy.org, to help you to learn about the Excellence Awards and to prepare your applications. We invite you to explore all of the available content. To view these materials, which include background, information about, and videos of past winning programs, the selection committee listing, photos from past awards events, and the applications themselves, which can be downloaded from our site. Click on the Events tab on the top navigation, which is circled in red on this slide. Then on the left-hand navigation, you would click on Excellence Awards. All of the resources are linked under Learn More on the bottom of that page or under the Excellence Awards link in the left navigation. To give you some background on the Excellence Awards, since 2000, these awards have been presented annually to companies demonstrating leadership in corporate giving. Since 2003, CECP has presented its Directors Award to a nonprofit demonstrating an exemplary partnership with the corporation. This year will be the 11th Annual Excellence Awards, and the recognition of these awards has grown in stature and today is one of the most coveted awards in the field of corporate philanthropy. Last June, CECP honored Intel, General Mills, the Boston Beer Company, and Partners in Health, which was the nonprofit nominated by Eli Lilly and Company with the Excellence Awards in Corporate Philanthropy. You can learn more about each of their winning programs, and they were truly extraordinary programs, each one of them, and watch brief highlights videos on our website, as mentioned previously. This here is a photo of their CEOs who received the award, and in the middle is Christina Gold of Western Union, who was the previous winner of the Excellence Award, and she moderated our discussion at that event. Next year's winners will be celebrated in a special awards presentation at the Time Warner headquarters in New York on June 1st, 2011. Over 300 senior giving officers, CEOs, industry thought leaders, and media will attend the awards event. The winning corporate CEO or nonprofit executive director must be available to receive the award in person, and this attendance will be confirmed in advance. We will discuss this in more detail when we get to the timeline for applying. Now I'd like to discuss some of the benefits to companies and nonprofit organizations that apply for the Excellence Awards. For winning companies and nonprofit organizations, in addition to the recognition in front of peers at the June event, these organizations are featured in a professional highlights video that is shown at the awards event and is also on CECP's website and distributed on our social media platforms. CECP will work closely with the communications teams at the winning organizations to secure press opportunities. Award winners have received media attention for their philanthropy programs in a number of high-profile media outlets, which include Bloomberg News, CNBC, Fast Company, The Economist, Forbes, and Fox Business, among many others. But what about those corporations that don't win the award? There are great benefits to those programs as well. First, the process of applying for the awards can be a productive exercise in communicating the goals and impact of your program for use in other materials. Also, the selection committee takes great care in discussing and compiling feedback for each of the applicants. After the award ceremony in June, each applicant has the opportunity to consult with CECP about areas where their program may be able to improve. To our knowledge, CECP is the only award-granting organization in the industry to provide this feedback loop, and we consider it an important part of our larger advocacy mission. So we encourage everyone, even those who win the award, to come back to us and ask for that constructive feedback to help move you forward to even greater impact in your philanthropy programs. Also, by applying for the awards, CECP will be aware of your company's initiatives, improving the probability that it will be featured in CECP events, publications, and online material, all with your consultation, of course. There is a checkbox on page 3 of the applications, which I'd like you to pay attention to. In this question called Permissions, asks if CECP may contact you to share qualitative information about the program if opportunities arise. We encourage you to check yes so that we can share your philanthropy stories, either with the media or in features at CECP Summit or website or other outlets. The point being that the more we know about your programs, the more our team can look out for ways to help you get recognition for the great work that you're already doing every day. That said, we will never share information without your permission, and never would we share any financial giving data. Now I'd like to introduce you to and hand this over for a moment to Margaret Coady, Director of CECP, and Margaret oversees the selection process for the Excellence Awards in Corporate Philanthropy.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to the question and answer period, but wanted to also share the reflections we've had from our jury on what makes a winning application, and I look forward to that lively part of our session. But first wanted to cover a little bit more of the mechanics of getting your application in. So the first thing to do is decide which application to fill out. I want to emphasize that companies who want to complete an application do not need to be from a CECP member company. This is open to any corporation who would like to share the story of their great work with our jury for consideration for the award. There is one award for corporations, but they're judged in different categories. So if you're interested in applying on behalf of your corporate program, you download the corporate award, and once you have that award open, you indicate whether your revenues are above or below $20 billion for the most recently completed fiscal year. What that means is that companies above $20 billion will be judged against one another, and those with revenues below $20 billion will be judged as a separate category. For a nonprofit organization and corporation who want to showcase the partnership that they've had, there's a separate application for that, and that award is called our Director's Award. And the award is filled out, the award application is filled out jointly. So together the corporation and the nonprofit partner discuss their answers and submit one combined application representing their partnership. The operating budget of the 501c3 organization should be equal to or exceed $500,000 annually. And one nice benefit to being recognized with this award is that CECP's Board of Directors makes a $25,000 contribution to the nonprofit that wins the award, in addition to some of the other benefits that Courtney mentioned previously. Let me now discuss the selection committee for the award. CECP is proud to assemble each year a cross-sector group of thought leaders and practitioners to determine which applications to recognize with Excellence Awards each June. So it's this external selection committee, which is comprised of representatives from the corporate, nonprofit, government, social investment, foundation, and academic communities who ultimately decides who the winners will be. Each of these selection committee members will be listed on CECP's website in the resources area that Courtney flagged earlier. However, right now we are in the process of thanking jurors who are rolling off their service on this committee and welcoming new ones. So we expect to have that finalized in the upcoming weeks. It is one tradition of ours to have prior winners of the award serve on the jury. So you can be assured that there's always somebody who deeply understands the complexity both from the nonprofit side and the corporate side of managing these programs. One thing that I think is my first important tip for you is that really you've got a group of cross-sector advocates for corporate philanthropy who are looking forward to really celebrating the great work that you do. These are, you should consider them peers of yours so that when you fill out your application, bear in mind that these are people who do understand the importance of corporate giving and its relevance. So it might be helpful to go to a level of detail that somebody with a deep knowledge of these issues would appreciate. I will say that in terms of the judging process, each juror will score each application separately. They then come together for an in-person meeting, and the scores that they've given each company are used as the starting point for a lively discussion of who should be the winner. At the conclusion of that discussion, each selection committee member anonymously votes to decide the winner. CECP does not participate in that selection committee meeting except for to kind of organize it and send out the preparatory materials. It really is the work of the selection committee that ultimately decides who wins. What we have on this slide here is our suggestion as to how you might think about your time leading up to the deadline for the awards, which is December 1st, right at the end of the day in Eastern Standard Time. I know that every company will have its own process, but what we wanted to do was at least lay out what might be the sketch of how you might think about your time, of course subject to the internal processes that you know will come into play as you prepare your application. It's never too soon to begin a brainstorming session to select the program that you think is most relevant. If a nonprofit and a corporation are applying together, to maybe have an initial brainstorming call. If you have colleagues in other parts of the organization or in other geographies who you think might have information that contributes to the application, now might be a good time to just start the initial brainstorming. As Courtney mentioned, for an organization to be recognized with an Excellence Award in June, the CEO or executive director of the nonprofit must be available in person. It might be a good idea now to check the calendar of your CEO and executive director, and if possible, put a hold on that date in anticipation of having a winning result. If you are checking the calendar of your CEO or executive director and it looks like there's a conflict, we encourage you to apply anyway. Even though our eligibility requirement that the CEO or executive director be there is very firm, there are never any exceptions made. Sometimes we find that a CEO is willing to change their plans once they learn of a winning application. So try to put a hold on their calendar, but if you're unable to do so, we would encourage you to apply anyway using your best judgment, with our experience being that sometimes plans can be moved. But we'll leave that to your discretion. You'll notice that we have kind of emphasis on the internal approvals process. One thing that we've noticed in the past as a cause for late applications is that the application is actually finished, but it's sitting on somebody's desk waiting for them to give that final sign-off. Especially because the application deadline occurs right after Thanksgiving, it can be a time when a lot of people are not reliably in the office, or they're just about to leave or have just come back and have quite a lot to get to. So we recommend that you allot a sufficient amount of time for any kind of unexpected delays in that process to be sure that you can get your application in by the deadline. Because for the first time, CECP is now penalizing late applications. This is something to allow our jury sufficient time to review them. So late applications delay the process in a way that we'd like to try to avoid. So we encourage you to start planning now using this timeline perhaps as a starting point.
And the only thing, this is Courtney, that I'd add to that is for the nonprofits, because you're filling it out jointly, to make sure that there is ample time for coordinating your efforts in whatever way works for your two organizations.
Terrific. So now we're going to start diving into how to approach the application. What I've got here is some very elementary advice, but just as a way to kind of get us warmed up before we look into the specific questions and awards criteria. So as with any application, you're going to want to read the entire application before you get started, because it's going to be very important that you pick a program that you think shows your efforts to best advantage. So really understanding how many points are assigned to each question and where you might locate certain details. It might be useful to be very familiar with the application start to finish before you get started. It might not be obvious as you begin what examples or details to put in which section. We've tried to make this very clear, but it might not be fully obvious to you where a certain nuance goes until you've actually begun writing. Our recommendation is that maybe you just stay flexible, using bullet points for now, letting yourself kind of copy and paste as the application takes shape, especially if you're working on this collaboratively with a nonprofit organization and a corporation or colleagues in different geographies, to keep it flexible and not get too attached to any specific wording too early in the process. One thing that I also like to advise is that you really put an emphasis on having fun telling your story. As I mentioned earlier, the selection committee that will be rating the applications are peers and champions of corporate giving, and they want to really understand the details of your program, and they will be reading a lot of applications. So feel free to share details that communicate your excitement and enthusiasm for the program and what you feel makes it different, because that'll make it more fun for them to read, and it's really a great opportunity to share the accomplishments of your team. I know that many of you have not yet had the chance to download the application, so I'm going to give you kind of a preview of what you'll see when you do. The application is slightly different from past years, so anybody who's reapplying this year, you'll notice some differences. One thing that we've done is really condense the number of questions that we're asking and provide guidance after each question as to the types of elements you might want to include in your response. So for example, we ask an overarching question such as, provide an overview of your overall corporate philanthropy strategy, or what makes this program innovative? And underneath that, we have a number of bullet points providing you suggestions and guidance as to what you might include in that response. I just want to emphasize here that you shouldn't lose sight of the overall question itself as you dive into the items that we've listed for your consideration. The points that the jury will be given to each question are really based on your answer to the overall question. The bullet points that you'll see underneath each question are really just for your inspiration. You should not feel required to address them all. You should not feel like you don't have a strong application if you haven't addressed them all. You don't let them cause any type of existential crisis on your side. They're really just to spur your imagination and make sure that if they're important aspects of your program, we've reminded you of them at the critical moment before you tell us about them to make sure that your story is as complete as possible. You might also find that the items we've considered for your consideration don't cover some parts of your story that you think are quite important. In that case, we encourage you to go ahead and include anything that you think fortifies your answer. If that stretches beyond what we've suggested as being relevant, but feel free to include those details. Another item I wanted to discuss with you today is choosing the program to submit, because I think there's an aspect of the application that might take you in a direction that confuses the emphasis of the application. We ask very early in both applications to get a sense of the scope of the commitment that's been made. How long has the program existed? What type of funding commitment has been given? But don't let that shape too much which program you choose to submit for evaluation, because really the points are given by the jury based on CECP's 4 Excellence Awards criteria, or our standards of excellence. So you're not being scored on how much you've spent or how long the program has been in existence. We want to know that as important background to share with the jury, but the points are really based on your ability to demonstrate CEO leadership, innovation, dedication to measurement, and partnership. So really let the questions in the application that have a point value guide which programs you choose. Now I'd like to get into some of the feedback that we've heard from selection committee members over the years that we think might be useful to you as you plan to tell your story. So the first item on this list is to keep your writing style fresh, vivid, and clear. As I mentioned earlier, it'll be notable to the jury whether you've enjoyed filling out the application. I think that's something that really comes through in the writing. One area where we've seen some companies run into trouble is if they use very high-level generalities to describe their program. You see a couple of examples of language that might fall into that category. We focus our giving where we can have an impact, or we address critical challenges where we live and work. These might be very true statements of your program, and they might be sentences that launch you into a great answer, but if your entire answer were to stay at that level of abstraction, you might be missing an opportunity to really share the detail and nuance that will help the jury understand your program deeply. I think one thing to keep in mind is that at this level that you see in the red text, a lot of the best programs in the world will all sound the same if described at that high a level, and it's really important to use language that you feel is kind of precisely communicates what you've done and what your goals are in a specific, vivid way, as opposed to relying on generalities. Another thing that jurors have noticed in the past is sometimes applicants omit information that might be useful in understanding the specific context in which the program has taken place, whether that's about the program area that you're focused on, the geography in which you're working, the industry in which you're working. And sometimes those details are so obvious to you as an applicant that almost you forget to include them and write them down and put them on paper for the jury to consider. So as you're going through your application, you might just do a check to make sure that you haven't missed some of the basics because they're so familiar to you that they almost escape your notice. Another area where we would counsel applicants to pay close attention is to try to really substantiate the claims that you're making in your application with stories or numbers, not descriptions alone. So here I have some examples of text that would be slightly less successful. So we work with grantees to create groundbreaking tools. Again, that might be the introductory sentence to a great answer, but if you were to stay at that level, it would be too abstract. You might eventually consider how you can describe what exactly the tools are and what, in your mind, makes them groundbreaking. The same thing with the second example. You know, what were the results and how do those compare to results that others have gotten? Eventually getting to that level of detail will really bring your program to life. But as I said on the prior slide, don't let this lead you down a path of forgetting to include the basics. You might look at your answers and see whether you've provided some context, described for the jury what your actions were, and then shared the results. If you share kind of the context, action, and results, you'll make sure that your story is complete. A couple of just basic pieces of advice here, but maybe good to build into your own personal timeline. That colleagues, and perhaps even those outside of your department might be really helpful in looking at your application with fresh eyes. Not only will they be able to help you catch any little wordsmithing issues, but they might also help you spot any jargon that you've used or any opportunities they see to answer the question more completely. Another thing as you look at the application is that we have word limits for each question. We designed these to be quite generous, so don't feel you need to write up until the last word. If you feel like you've answered the question in fewer words, you're welcome to stop there. We did mean to be generous. Another thing that is important to keep in mind is that we've tried to design the application question so that it's very clear what parts of your story to put in which bucket. But if at any time you feel like you're repeating yourself, you feel like the application is asking you to repeat yourself, that's a good time to pause and either confer with a colleague or even contact CCP for clarity, because we've done our best to make sure that you're not kind of using the same examples throughout the application, that there's one logical home for a part of your story and not having that part of the story feel like it needs to come up over and over again. So if needed, feel free to contact us, but maybe discuss with a colleague also to come up with what you believe goes in which bucket. So now I want to get into the meat of the applications themselves. In the beginning of each application, whether it's the Director's Award application or the corporate application, we're going to ask you to describe your program and the program strategy. And what I've got here are some examples that we would consider on the stronger side and then less successful examples. So when you're able to describe your program or your program strategy in very kind of clear language that helps people understand what your focus area is, what population you're trying to reach, and what your overall goals are, that's very helpful. We have seen some companies in the past take, again, a very high-level approach, and that doesn't necessarily create that kind of image in the jury's mind-eye of exactly what it is you're trying to do. So it might be best to avoid high-level descriptions like creating thriving communities or taking a strategic approach. And then include evidence of that elsewhere in the application, but maybe not abstract your description of what you do to such a high level. After you've described your program and program strategy, there are really just 5 more questions remaining for you. One is going to be about CEO leadership. One is going to be about innovation. One is going to be about your dedication to measurement of your program. And one is going to be about partnership. The partnership category is what's emphasized in the Director's Award, because, again, this is filled out jointly by a corporation and a nonprofit. In the Corporate Award, all 4 of these criteria are given the same point value. I'm going to go through these one at a time and share with you strong examples and less successful examples of answers that we've seen shared with the jury in the past. So the first criteria that we have for our awards is CEO leadership, that the CEO is actively and effectively involved in the success of the company's community investment programs. You see on this slide some strong examples and some less successful examples. If you can ever share with the selection committee stories of specific actions that your CEO has taken to personally get involved in the success of the program, that's always very helpful. So saying that a CEO encourages participation in the United Way starts to hint at the direction of your CEO's involvement, but it doesn't really paint a clear picture. If what you really meant by that sentence was, that CEO meets with middle managers and sends out a personal email and has a company-wide phone call, that level of detail would be very compelling. But don't take for granted that the jury will know that that's what you meant if you describe it just as encourages participation. It's that extra detail that's so valuable. Let's go on to the next criteria, innovation. So by innovation, we mean that the nominated program really stretches beyond traditional approaches and solutions in the pursuit of exceptional results for communities and the company. So examples are really kind of highlighting what caused you to apply in the first place. What is it that excites you about the way that you're interacting with your program focus area that has really created a lot of internal momentum and excitement between your team or between you and your partners? Again, this all ties back to the advice that we covered very quickly before we even got into these awards categories, but specific, substantiated details in clear language will really help your story sing. Less acceptable examples would be ones where you, again, describe things in at a very high level. Dedication to measurement, the company and its partners demonstrate a strong commitment to accountability, benchmarking, and continuous improvement. I think one thing that's really important here, and you'll see this in the application, because again, what I'm not showing here, but that you'll quickly see when you download the application is, under each of these questions, we've really given you some suggested guidance. So, for example, in the corporate application, when we ask about measurement, we're giving specific guidance like, how is the measurement informed the initial program design? Please provide a description of the metrics used to evaluate the program. What role has measurement played in the continuous program improvement? So each of these, even though I'm skimming over them here, when you download the application, you'll see that not only do we provide a description at the high level of the criteria, but that in the application itself, you'll see some guidance as to what you might include. But here again, it's very helpful to provide specific numbers. Anecdotes are always helpful, but you should always look to try to provide some kind of quantitative detail to the progress towards your established goals whenever possible. Less successful examples are ones in which you say that you know you've made an impact, but you're not able to share how you know that you've made an impact. So any information you can share that really either lets people know how you know you're being successful, and then of course any explanation you're able to provide is how that measurement allows you to make better decisions over time is really valuable. Partnership, and again, this is the criteria that's really emphasized in the Director's Award, but has an equal weighting in the Corporate Award, is collaboration with partners based on mutual interests and assets that allows you to exceed the results that you could get either on your own or with other partners. And what we're really looking for here is a sense of collaboration. So for the jury to put a corporate nonprofit pairing on stage in front of 300 people in New York City, they really want to showcase an example where it's clear that there's really a great working relationship. So any vivid detail that you can give about how you interact with one another, why you chose one another initially, what it is about kind of the merging of your expertise and assets that allows the program to be stronger than it could otherwise is really, really valuable here. You'll see in the guidance for this question that we also give you the opportunity to include 2 major lessons that you've learned from each other in the Corporate Award. And here, again, I'll remind you that you've got a jury of peers here. So it would be less successful to say, you know, a lesson learned for us is that time, talent, and treasure all come together to create social impact. That would be kind of a very high-level lesson that perhaps most grant makers already know. But if you really have had an experience with your nonprofit partner where you really kind of had an eye-opening lesson of don't be fearful that you'll be judged negatively for that. I mean, this really is about learning and growing through partnership. So it doesn't have to be an example where you and your nonprofit have perhaps stumbled, but you shouldn't shy away from sharing that if you think there was a positive outcome on the other side and it actually made your program stronger. I know that some companies have shied away from sharing their true lessons learned because it might imply that their strategy wasn't perfect in the first place. I think that's okay. Again, this is an award committee who understands the complexities of these programs and knows how they evolve over time.
Terrific. So thanks, Margaret, for giving some background on the application itself. We've received a couple questions, and we'd now like to invite all of you to type any questions that you have about the applications into the bottom questions area of your toolbar. And again, you just type them in there and send them to us, and we can address your questions now. One of the questions that has come through is whether you have to be a U.S. company to apply, or if it's open to companies headquartered in other countries. The answer to that is that the company can be headquartered in other countries. It does not have to be a U.S.-based company. However, if the nonprofit organization for the Director's Award does need to be a U.S.-based nonprofit. So for the corporate application, the company must be publicly or privately owned. It has to be a for-profit business in the private sector, but it's not necessary for it to be headquartered in the United States.
If you look at the history of past winners on CCP's website, I think you'll find that we've had examples of 2 corporate winners from companies headquartered outside the United States in the past.
Another question that we've received is whether the submissions fall into major categories, if there are some that are a certain percentage that are education related or environment related. Margaret has reviewed countless applications and is in a great position to answer that question.
I can't point to any specific themes that we've seen in the body of applications that we've received. I think one thing that we find very exciting about the award application every year is that it attracts companies of all revenue sizes and all industries, and companies really take a thoughtful look at the kind of assets and challenges that are faced by their stakeholders and that tie to their expertise, and that has really generated a wide breadth of programs for consideration by the jury. So I can't say that they fall into specific categories per se. Certainly education is a funding area that's quite popular among corporations in general, but I can't say that it necessarily dominates the application pool.
Great. Now we have a question about the Director's Award application that is written jointly by the company and nonprofit. The question on executive leadership, the question asked to us, Margaret, is whether it refers to the nonprofit executive director or to the company CEO or to both.
Sure. When you download the application, you'll see that the majority of the Director's Award asks for a joint response. The exception actually comes exactly on this question that you're asking me about. In question 5 in the Director's Award application that asks about executive leadership, you'll see that there's a space for the corporate response and a space for the nonprofit response. In the corporate response, you have an opportunity to share anything that the corporate CEO has done to support the success of the program. And in the nonprofit response, really the most appropriate thing to talk about is the nonprofit CEO or executive director and anything that they've done to support the success of the program. If one story is stronger than the other, it's okay to have an imbalance. It's just an opportunity for you each to weigh in on what your respective leaders have done. There's an opportunity to address separately, and they each have their own separate word count.
We've received a couple questions that's more tactical about this presentation today and whether it will be sent electronically. We can make this available to you via email for the participants, and this webinar is being recorded, and we will make it available on our website for others of your colleagues who would like to watch it. Moving on here, there's a question about whether an entry would be accorded more weight if supplemented with videos, news clips, etc.
That's a terrific question, and obviously it's a huge temptation to tell your story with as much vivid detail as possible, but it's really important to the jury to have a level playing field for all applications, which is why we limit an application to only what's allowed in the Word document that constitutes the application itself. Anything that's submitted above and beyond that application can't be shared with the jury. Our jury is very geographically dispersed and kind of is going to be evaluating the application separately and can't accommodate a wealth of kind of materials being shipped to them or for their additional consideration beyond the application. So we ask that people stick to the Microsoft Word document as your best opportunity to showcase what you've done, not sending anything supplemental, because unfortunately we can't share it with those who will be judging the award.
Right. The only time there's ever been any supplemental information is if anything needed to be clarified for the jurors in the financials or otherwise, and then but we can't, as Margaret said, accommodate any other multimedia presentations or other formats other than the application, which we've really taken some great care to craft so that it can be in a format that can best represent your program. There's a question about the presentation in the award criteria for dedication and measurement. There was a suggestion of a percentage of participants giving a high satisfaction rating and why that might have been under a less successful example. Margaret, maybe you can expand on why other examples might have been a stronger explanation of a dedication and measurement.
Sure. Each program is going to have the metrics that best suit understanding what difference the program has made. And the reason why I included that as an example that was actually less successful is because a lot of times a statistic like that is left to stand on its own. So someone tells you that we did a survey of everybody who participated and they all liked it. And it's useful to kind of really contextualize that. Has that number changed over time? You know, when in the process are you asking that question? What decisions have you made based on learning that statistic? Do you consider that a good or a bad number? How does that benchmark against what types of favorability you've received for other programs? Or if you're doing it with a nonprofit and they run this program with other corporations and you're talking about your partnership, is that higher than what the nonprofit has experienced with other groups? So just listing that as a standalone statistic is interesting, but not as interesting when you provide the other wraparound information to help the jury really understand and contextualize it. So I put that on there, and I'm glad someone asked about it, because it's not a bad thing to include, but it would be difficult for the jury to really appreciate its value without a little bit more background. So thank you for that question.
Another question is, what are your expectations, which I assume means, I guess, CECP or the selection committee, on the closing thoughts section of the application? It's a great question.
Sure. I think that our awards criteria are clearly very important to CECP. One of the core aspects of our mission is to really set forward the standard for measurement and benchmarking when it comes to corporate philanthropy. So when it comes to measuring the excellence, CEO leadership and innovation and dedication to measurement and partnership are really important to us. But the closing thoughts is really an opportunity for you to include any last details that you think might have been missed by conforming to our priorities. If there's anything else that you think really adds to your story, feel free to include it there. You'll see that the point value on both applications is quite low. Out of 100 points, I think in both applications it's worth 5 points. But it's just an opportunity for you to kind of really bring it all together. Again, don't feel the need to really repeat anything that you think you've clearly said before, but if there's kind of an overall synthesis or kind of final exclamation point you want to put on it to include any details that maybe you didn't feel fit neatly in another bucket, feel free to do it there.
We have one question about the applications we receive. If there's a typical number of applications that we receive, this is a very competitive award, and it has grown in stature over the years. Is that something you can comment on?
Sure. The one thing I'll say there is that we're not quite sure what to expect this year because we did make a change over the prior year. So we're used to probably having, I would say maybe 70 applications across corporate categories and maybe 30 to 40 applications across the Director's Award, but we've actually changed the categories this year. In the past, we had an award category specifically for companies whose revenues were $5 billion or fewer. This year, you'll notice that award category has been eliminated, so we imagine that might shift the number of applications we can expect.
Great. There's a question about longevity of the programs. Can initiatives that are still playing out in terms of grant length, in, for example, multi-year grants, be submitted if at least 1 year of impact has already been collected or assessed? Which is a great question. There is a requirement in the application that the program be in existence for 18 months, and this is for the corporate application. And for the nonprofit, the requirement is 24 months. So it is important that the program can show that it has some longevity already, but absolutely a program that is still in process with multi-year grants and has the potential to affect even greater change in the future, that would be an appropriate program to put forth to the selection committee.
As a matter of fact, you'll see in the eligibility requirements that we actually ask that the program not be wrapped up and finished, because by the time we recognize the programs in June, we don't want to be talking about a program that's long since over. So you'll see in the eligibility requirements that not only do we ask that the program have existed for a certain amount of time by the time you submit your application, but that you also plan to continue the program for at least another 18 months.
One question is, how important does the company's overall mission need to compare with the philanthropy mission? I think there's a program sort of generally on the corporate, the overall philanthropic programs, and then specifically to the program.
Sure. So there is a certain amount of background information that's required as the very first question of the corporate award, which is provide an overview of your company's overall corporate philanthropy strategy. You'll see that this is worth 10 points out of a total of 100 possible points for the application. So that gives you a relative sense of how important that is in the context of the larger program being evaluated. So 10 points for your overall strategy, and then 90 points based on the specific program that you're nominating.
We have one question about whether we have examples of winning applications available on our website. We do not make the actual applications available on our website. Margaret has provided some really great insight into the kinds of really strengths of detail that our jury would be looking for. We do, however, have great examples of winning programs on our website, and really the application is just a vehicle to the programs. But we have videos from previous awards winners as well as synopsis of their programs that I encourage you to explore. There's a question now about the Director's Award. The application states that the application can only be between one company and one nonprofit, and that is definitely correct. Is it okay if the program includes several other partners in the government and public sector? I think that with many of these philanthropic programs, there are many actors involved and not necessarily just two partners. For the purposes of the application, we ask that you submit and focus on one partnership between the corporation and the nonprofit, and that you delve into all of the great assets that each of the organizations brings to the other. And it definitely may be worth mentioning the other cross-sector partnerships that also contribute to the success of the program, as that definitely is a model that we see going forward, is collaboration among many stakeholders. But the award really would be recognizing the partnership between the nonprofit and the corporation, and that would be the area of the program that we would ask you to focus your attention on.
I think maybe particularly in the part of the application that focuses on innovation, it sounds like maybe if you've got a cross-sector collaboration that's kind of new and different, that it might go there, but we would also have to look whether it fits under the partnership category. It depends on kind of what aspect of the story you want to emphasize, but certainly if the ability to mobilize different sectors toward a common end is a huge part of what you and your nonprofit have worked on together, you would certainly want to include that.
Okay, we have one question about the time commitment, which we mentioned earlier, to the point that the program must be ongoing for 18 months. What if the geographic location has changed, but the program is still ongoing? I think we may need a little more information, so we may follow up with you afterwards, but if I'm understanding your question correctly, as long as the program has been ongoing for 18 months, that certainly meets our eligibility requirements and would be, encouraged to submit the application. It's the 18 months is the time from the program's beginning without geographic specificity. Well, it's 3:50 right now, and it looks like the questions coming in are slowing in rate, but we will stay for a few more minutes if there are additional questions, and are happy also to answer any questions that you may have after the webinar as well. As I mentioned earlier, this webinar is being recorded, and we will post the video on our website, and we encourage you to share it with your colleagues and with your partners, whether those be nonprofit or corporate, and have them watch the webinar as well. And as we saw in the beginning, we encourage you to review the application in its entirety. If additional questions arise when you have time to really sit down with the application, please do feel free to contact us.
You've asked a number of wonderful questions so far. I wonder if any of our answers have generated any kind of follow-up questions. So feel free, if you feel like maybe we've touched on a subject but it left you with something that you were still wondering about, feel free to submit your question. But really appreciate the level of care you've put into thinking about this application. Again, I would emphasize that even though we're presenting this webinar and the application has all of these eligibility requirements and twists and turns, really this is about a celebration of corporate philanthropy. So I hope that you all feel encouraged to apply. It really is a terrific jury and a wonderful opportunity to be recognized.
Terrific. Well, if no one has other questions right now, I think we'll conclude our webinar for today. We thank you so much for joining us. And when you close the webinar, a short survey with 6 very quick questions will pop up, and we would ask that you fill that out to help us in making future webinars more useful and relevant to you in your work. As we've mentioned, we have all the applications and the materials and examples of past winners on our website, corporatephilanthropy.org. And please mark your calendar that the applications deadline is December 1st, 2010, and craft your work plan towards that so that it can be a constructive and positive experience for you. In addition, we're here. Our phone number is 212-825-1000, and over email, the info@corporatephilanthropy.org email would reach us, and we'd be able to respond to any questions. Thanks again for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.